Welcome to the Lost Boys, the Found Fathers podcast. I'm Gabriel O'Sullivan, and joining me is my co-host and friend, Will Haycox. We are men who have suffered the loss of a child, and through this production, we desire to offer encouragement, strength, and hope to our fellow brothers who have traveled the same journey. All right, welcome, Will.
Good morning.
We are going to continue in our Intentional Fatherhood series, and this is going to be episode 9, and we're going to be talking about encouraging individuality and autonomy, and about how God's created us all unique and individual. And so I'm going to throw it over to you, Will.
Thanks. So disclaimer at the beginning of this one, some of the words we're using are buzzwords, but they're the most appropriate words to use. So if you've listened to any of we're probably around, 80 episodes at this point?
Yeah.
If you've listened to any of the other 80 episodes we've done, you should know we don't agree with most of the things the world teaches. And so if you hear something, if this is the only episode you're listening to, which I don't advise, go and listen to some of our other episodes to kind of know where we're going with this. But obviously we're doing this topic, so we think there is a biblical perspective, something the Bible has to say on it, that's good. So going from there, I think what we're going to try to talk about today is just encouraging your children to be individuals. Like what I was just kind of throwing at Gabe right before we started is we're not intending to raise robots. Like the last episode we did was on discipline, and you could incorrectly assume like the goal of parenting is to raise productive members of society who don't do bad things. They're nice to their kids. They're nice to their spouse if they get married. They're nice to their kids if they have kids. And they're good employees. They just, they're like 9-to-5ers, whatever. They just go in, they do their job. They go home, they do their job at home, they go to bed, and they do it over and over again. And that's not what we want for ourselves, not what we want for our kids. I think ultimately what we're getting at here is God has given each of us as adults and every child certain gifts and abilities, whether it be, I'm talking about anything from like talent in sports that can cause them to go all the way to the NFL or the MLB or whatever their level is, or just to college, and that can give them a platform to proclaim the gospel. And you see it a lot of times, players will say, all glory to God, and whether they mean that or they don't mean that, that is bringing some glory to God. And if they are sincere in that, they can use that platform to proclaim the gospel and encourage people to come to know the Lord. And maybe a more realistic scenario, you are teaching your child to go out and to use, if they're artistic, to use their songwriting skills or their ability to paint something in a way to glorify the Lord. And so there's lots of different ways that you can use your skills and abilities, whether it's public speaking, whether it's a talent for helping people. You go into the medical field, you do something that heals bodies, whatever it is. If you're like I am, if you're in construction, you have a talent for reading blueprints or for laying brick or for whatever it is, wiring up junction boxes and things like that. You can use that to honor the Lord in the way that you do your work, and you do it with excellence. And you can also use it to be a witness to your fellow employees, your coworkers, your coworkers or your employees, that I'm doing what I'm doing with excellence because I am made uniquely and created by the Lord, and I want to give Him honor and glory for giving me those talents. So I think that's the kind of where we're going with this episode.
I love it. And I first of all, kind of early shout out. If you hadn't checked out my books, Every Little Thing, 6 Small Steps to Perfect Peace, or Thy Will Be Done, there's a question mark into that. Please go ahead and look for those on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Okay, enough of the advertisement there. But I want to jump in and say a couple things about what you just said, Will. One, it made me think of Psalms 139. We've probably brought this scripture up before because it's very dear to, I think, both of our hearts, just as it relates to, kind of the overarching theme of this podcast, which is helping dads, who have lost children, realizing that our kids, even if they're not with us here anymore on earth, they were created with a purpose and on purpose. Doesn't matter if they lived 6 weeks and then you had a DNC, your wife had a DNC, or they, made it out of the womb and then didn't survive after that. Like, they were all made with a purpose and on purpose by the Lord. And we see that in Psalms 139 verse 13 says, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." So, I mean, wow. Like, we read those and we realize that we existed even before we existed, right? That God has a picture for every person that's ever been born or even not born, that we're just getting created in a mother's womb. Like, he saw that. He saw us. He saw our children in his mind's eye before we were created. Okay, remember, God doesn't have new or original thoughts, okay? Because he's God. All thoughts are ultimately his, right? It's not like he was like, "Oh, I'm going to make Will Haycox today." Who's Will Haycox? Well, let me just construct that, right? We have to do that. We have to think. You use a construction example. That architect has to sit down and go, "Okay, what do I want this building to look like? And where do I want this wall to go? And where do I want this electrical wire to come in? And this HVAC unit, etc." Like, we have to come up with thoughts. Like, God doesn't have to do that, but he has known who you were. He's known who your kids were going to be even before they existed in their mother's womb. And so that's when we go to this, hey, explore your identity and understand your autonomy and your uniqueness. We're taking it back to the scripture. Like Will said, we're not trying to throw some kind of, popular, media, trendy words at this, where we're saying, "Oh, your kid wants to, identify as a cat." Well, okay, get them a litter box, in their room. No. We're not saying that at all. We're saying God created them unique as people, okay, and that we want to help them to understand that they were given certain gifts, talents, and abilities, and we want to help pull that out of them so that way they can, use them for God's glory and for their benefit as well.
Yeah, and I think that's something I was going to mention too, is like the guardrails here are like, you can say, "I don't support my kids at all. Like, my kids are going to be extensions of me. They do what's convenient for me." I made the joke or the comment about like the stereotypical 1800s father. Like, he went to work, or let's just say a stereotypical like rich 1800s father. So like, he goes out and he does his business and he comes home and the children are waiting at the door and they say, "Hello, father. Hello, father. Hello, father. Good to see you." And he pats them on the head and says, "All right, good kid." They go hang out with the nanny or with the wife, and the father sits in his chair and he smokes his pipe. Like, you can be that.
Mary Poppins.
Yes, like a little Mary Poppins-ish.
Mr. Banks. Come on, this is exactly the thing that I'm.
"Hello, children. All right, I don't want to see you again the rest of the night."
Yeah.
Like, that sort of idea. Like, you can be on that extreme. Like, the whole purpose of me having kids is just to enjoy the fun things about them and then send them away when I don't want them. And you're not going to support them in anything. You're going to force them to play this sport because that's what you like. You're going to force them to play this instrument because that's what you like. Or you're going to tell them they can't play this instrument because you don't care anything about a tuba, and you're not going to waste your time, in your mind to go hear your kid in a concert. Or the other extreme, what you were saying, is where our world, where our popular psychology is pushing us that, like, you support your children in everything. If your child is 4'9" and he wants to be an NBA star, you support that dream. You send him to all the camps, and you pay for thousands of extra dollars of training. And one day, if you support your kid enough, he might realize his dream of playing in the NBA. And you're like, probably not. So like, I think there's, right. And like you said, if your child wants to identify as something that they're not, like, there's obviously a difference between like my 3-year-old playing like a dinosaur. Like, there is play and imagination, sure. And then there's like you're talking about. I probably shouldn't make that comment because this could make it too political. But there's identifying as things that you clearly are not, and you need to be corrected when you are going down a destructive path. And so like those are the guardrails.
Yeah, that's right. Guardrails. Mm-hmm. We're taking this in a scriptural context. Mm-hmm. Like, what does the Bible say about individual autonomy, and then how do we help our kids understand that and apply that to their lives in a constructive way. Yeah, I love that.
So with those being your guardrails, like, we want to chart the path down the middle, and figure out, like you said, what would the Bible teach us about helping our children embrace their individuality. And like one of the examples, I've said this multiple times on the podcast, one of the examples I see and I want to go to is David, because I love David. If you know the story of David, starts out a nobody, the Lord chooses him, he does great things, he's blessed, and then his rise causes Saul, the sitting king, to want to persecute him, want to kill him. He goes through lots of hardship. Ultimately, he becomes the king and sees, again, great success as a king. He gets complacent. He disobeys the Lord. And he ultimately, as he's in his old age and as he dies, he's seeing that, like, his kingdom, what he built and the blessings he got are fading, essentially. That Solomon would be, his son would be a good king in a strengthening Israel sort of way, but after Solomon, the kingdom is split up, and David sort of got that ball rolling with his sin and his mistake. But what I brought up David, the reason I brought up David, is if you think of, like, I'm a history guy, I think of like an ancient king, like you just imagine like there's this big, strong guy. He's a warrior in this ancient time, this nomadic people's time. Like, he's probably the king because he's the strongest guy. He's the most bloodthirsty guy. He's cruel and willing to go out and just murder somebody if they're standing in his way. And then he goes out and he expands his kingdom. And David was a warrior, but David wrote Psalms, or a lot of the Psalms. Yeah. And so, like, there's part of it is, like, David was unique in that he was just a random guy, son of a shepherd, and he goes out. He's a nobody. When you have the story of Goliath, he's just a nobody. He's the son of a shepherd, and he is a shepherd. He's going out to bring food to his brothers who are old enough to fight. So, like, he's a nobody. He's not anyone that's important or, bred to be a king. And God chooses him, empowers him, and allows him to kill Goliath, allows him to become a war hero. And then, his unique talents and abilities, he's a good leader of men. He's, he has these, 39 of his mighty men later on that are loyal followers, that when the king is trying to kill David, these guys are like, there's a statement where he tells them to go away, and they say, where else can we go? Like, you are our leader, you're our friend, we are with you in this, instead of running away from you and getting, a pardon from the king and just not being considered an enemy of the king. We're here with you. We're going to live and die with you. And then you see, throughout the Psalms, David cries out to the Lord. He's writing these songs. He's pouring out his heart in a way that, again, looking to like an ancient king, is a strong, stoic character. Like, you could look at him and be like, who's this pansy? Like, why is he over here? Why is he in the corner of the cave crying and writing songs? What a weirdo. Why would we follow that guy? He's just it talks about Saul being a strong, like, he's a head taller than everyone else. He's the king, the stereotypical powerful king, and he disobeys the Lord right after he becomes king. God takes his favor away, and then David is talked about being handsome, but he's not like this tall, strong, obviously we should follow this guy sort of characters the way he's described. So, not to just completely derail us and go down the David path, but what I'm getting at there is, like, David is one of the greatest kings in the Old Testament, and probably the greatest king in how he served and honored the Lord and led Israel to honor God. But he also was an individual in that he was a psalmist. He wrote songs. He sat around and did what, later would be considered like a non-kingly, like not a stoic or powerful thing to do. He cried and he poured out his heart to the Lord. He was very much an individual. Later on, when they're bringing the ark into the city, his wife, Saul's daughter, like, rebukes him for being out in the streets dancing in his tunic or something, not like his full kingly garments, but in something that was more probably what he'd wear around the house. And she rebukes him, like, what are the people going to think of you when they see you walking around like that? And he's like, basically, like, get behind me, Satan. Like, I'm going to honor the Lord even if it dishonors me in your eyes. So he was a strong individual, and he, for the most of his life, he didn't care what anyone else thought about him except the Lord. And that's all of that to say that's what we want for our kids, is whether they're warriors and they're strong and they become kings, or whether they just go out and they have a family, they have a husband or a wife, they have kids, they go to work, or they stay home and take care of the kids. Like, we want them to use their unique talents and abilities to honor the Lord, regardless of what anyone else thinks of them or their passions or how they use those passions. As long as they're doing something that honors the Lord, that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, that's right. Colossians 3:23, right? It says, "Do everything as unto the Lord." You know, I think that's what that says. Is that verse? It's not. It's another one real similar to it. And you know, I think it's great that you went there with David, because that's exactly what I was thinking. You know, it was like, we look at a guy that's, you know, that expresses his individuality, you know, greatly in the Bible, and certainly it's him, in that he has, you know, he has all these different characteristics about him that he wasn't afraid to explore and to give over to God, right? He wasn't afraid to give over his poetry. He wasn't afraid to give over his leadership ability to allow the Lord to use it, or his, you know, warrior abilities. He was, you know, everything he had, right, was the Lord's. And that's what we want to encourage in our kids. And I just kind of going off of that a little bit, just thinking about, you know, David being this, you know, precursor to Christ, and kind of showing us what the Christ, the Messiah, would be. You know, Isaiah 53, talking about Jesus, a prophecy about Jesus, says that he had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. Kind of thinking about what you said about David, like, he was so non-impressive from a physical stature standpoint. His daddy didn't even bring him in from the field. When Solomon? Well, not Solomon. Samuel.
Prophet Samuel. Yeah.
When Samuel came to pick out a king, right? Like, his daddy didn't like. That's kind of messed up. Like, when I'm
These
sure
all
maybe,
your sons. I've got another, but you probably wouldn't pick him. Yeah.
Right. And so, like him, right, Jesus, obviously, if we saw him walking down the street, we wouldn't look at him and be like, oh, that's the Messiah, you know, unless we were John the Baptist and we knew better, right? And yet, he was the Messiah. You know, you said his 39 mighty men said to where, you know, who are we going to go to? You know, like, what did Jesus' disciples say to him? There was a specific passage in Scripture where I think Peter says, "To whom shall we go?" Right. Again, kind of mirroring that passage, you know, back from the Old Testament of the precursor again of this scene with David and his 39 mighty men, right? Because of Jesus' disciples, obviously those being his mighty men. Like, where are they going to go, right? And then obviously, you know, we look at the Lord and we see his life, and he had this attractiveness about him, though, because of his kindness and his character and his gentleness, that people were, and his wisdom, that people were drawn to him and they followed him. You know, which is why he would sometimes have to get in a boat, leave everybody on the side of the, you know, of the lake, and like head out somewhere else because he just needed a break, right? Because people wanted to be around him so much, you know. And obviously David had his, you know, his strong, you know, following, you know, as well. And then, so we think about Jesus again. We think, oh, he is the strongest, you know, person in history, created history. But then we see him in the Garden of Gethsemane, right, just pouring out his heart to God, you know, asking if the cup of punishment that was about to come to him, the cup of wrath, could be taken away from him. You know, we see him entering Jerusalem and weeping for Jerusalem, you know, because he's heartbroken over it. We see him weeping at, you know, Lazarus' death, you know, and being sad for his friends because Lazarus had passed. And so we see this incredible strength. We also see this incredible tenderness, you know, in the person of Christ that we see modeled in David. Right? And so, again, having that understanding, like, should help us to then look at our kids and be like, okay, what is unique about them, where God has created them, you know, differently than their brothers or sisters, that we can help to nourish, you know, and to push.
Yeah, that's where I kind of wanted to go to bring this episode to its end here, is what does that look like? Like, it's cool to talk about David was a strong guy, but he also wrote songs. And like you said, Jesus was strong and tender at the same time. But depending on where you are in your child's development, like say mine are 3.5 and 7 months, so it looks different than yours, being almost all teenagers, I guess. Yeah. And so I think it's an easy way to say it, and I can let you jump in and say it from the older kids' perspective. Like, you as a parent, if you're engaged at all, you can see what your kids are interested in, and you can start to pick up on, like, even at 2, my daughter was 2, like, you can start to see, like, she likes to build things, or she likes to draw, or she likes to sing or dance or whatever. And like, that's not to say my kid danced to some Disney songs when she was 2. Now she's going to be a ballet dancer, and that's her calling in the world. Like, you don't have to go to extremes, but you'll start to see these patterns of Bonnie just got into Legos, like, which is cool because I like Legos too, but I guess as the kid who never had to buy them, I didn't consider how expensive they were, and man, Legos are expensive. So expensive. It's like 25 cents a piece almost in some of these sets. It's crazy.
Thanks, Will Ferrell, for making Legos more expensive.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Movie.
Appreciate that. Yeah, man, some of these sets are like $250, and I'm like, that's cool. I think that'd be fun to build with Bonnie. Never mind. Yeah. But yeah, so I think all that to say, like, the practical part of this episode is see what your children are interested in, and again, staying within these guardrails. So like, my kid's 13 is getting interested in I don't know, I'll just use the band that I thought of when I was growing up as like the worst thing ever, like Korn, or some of these songs. Like, I heard people saying like, oh, every word Korn says is either with demon worship or it's a cuss word. And I don't know, I never listened to a Korn song. If someone loves Korn here, cool. I don't know anything about it, but just to use that as an example, like, if your kids start to be super interested in some influencer online, and that influencer or that artist is using the Lord's name in vain and promoting this whole gender identity thing that's going on in our world right now, and telling the kids, they need to ignore their parents and they need to do whatever they want to do and whatever they think is best, and have sex with whoever they want, and explore their freedom in the worldly way of, I do what I want to do when I want to do it, consequences be damned. Then yes, that guardrail of, this is not being interested, this is letting your kids do everything they want. That's where you're in that place now where it's like, well, my kids love listening to Joe the Satan worshiper on YouTube, so I guess I should just embrace that passion. He wants me to buy him a Ouija board and all the stuff. Like, no, you're not a good parent, you're an idiot. Right. And you're leading your kid down a really stupid path, and it's going to hurt them. So like, taking that off the table, what we should be doing as parents is seeing what our kids are interested in and encouraging it. Like, if your kids like to go outside and look at leaves and sticks and all that, take them on some hikes and go outside, be outdoors, spend time, plan a camping trip. Like, something we've been wanting to do, which is harder with a 7-month-old. We've been wanting to like just go put a tent up in the backyard and just camp and have some fun. We're inside a fence, so Bonnie doesn't have to be like scared of anything. It's like a good introduction to camping. And so like, there's that sort of idea. If your kids are really interested in video games, again, like, there's the guardrail of like, don't let them play video games all day long every day, but buy a 2-player game and play with them, like, and spend some time with them, help them explore. Like, maybe that means they're going to be video game developers one day. Maybe they just like video games. I'm not a video game developer, and I grew up playing them. So like, it's not to jump to extremes of, my kid made a 3-point shot, they're going to the NBA. Right. But just all of that to say, to boil it down, like, support your kids in pursuing their passions and discovering their purpose in every way that is acceptable within honoring the Lord and feasible for your family's finances. I think that's the best way I can say that is, if you want to be a good father, you let your kids explore their individuality. And if, like, I've joked with my wife, like, I hope Bonnie, our daughter, likes to play softball or soccer like a sport. Like, I mean, not to demean dancers, I'm sure that's considered a sport, but like a tougher, like a competitive sport in softball or soccer or something, because I don't want to go to a ballet, what do you call it? dance, like a ballet
Recital,
dance, a
maybe?
recital.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't want to go to those all the time. Like I can joke with my wife about that, but if my daughter gets into ballet or gets into interpretive dance,
Yeah.
no one saw that but Gabe, but I made a negative expression. But if she gets in that, like as a good father, I can say, well, this is going to be something I'm really not going to enjoy for the next X amount of years. But Bonnie likes it. I love her. I'm going to encourage her. I'm going to send her to classes. I'm going to go to her recitals, and I'm going to help her, tell her she did a great job. I'm going to build her up in that, even if I care nothing about it. So I think that's what it means to help your kids explore their passions, is to set aside your comfort and your desires so that they can, again, within these guardrails, they can explore whatever theirs are.
The thing that I'm looking forward to is probably for the next 15 years, seeing Will as an extra in our community's production of the Nutcracker every Christmas.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because now we know the path. Every time I see Bonnie, I'm like, Bonnie, don't you love ballet dancing?
Here's some tickets to ballet recital. Take your dad.
Your daddy loves this stuff. He wants to do this with you. You're gonna get to be an extra.
You're gonna put a line item in your budget, buying ballet tickets for Bonnie just to mess with Will. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Starting September to December, that's gonna be your life every night, 5 days a week for the next 15 years.
Probably.
Yes. Just an aside, I know everybody calls that. I went to the Nutcracker when my daughter was like 3. As we was like, oh, we should take her. They do it every year in our community. They do a great job with it. Nice theater and everything. It's really good. I just didn't know that in ballet they don't talk. Like there's no
This is gonna be a
no
cool
dialogue.
play. Wait, what?
Dude, I'm like 15 minutes in. I lean over to my wife and I'm like, hey, when do they start talking? She's like, this is a ballet, stupid. Be quiet. Like they don't talk in ballets. I was like, oh man. Avery,
An hour and a half later.
Yes, and that was fascinating. I will say the athleticism of those ballet people, whatever, ballerinas
Dancers,
and ballet.
yes.
I don't know what you call the
Ballerinos,
guys.
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe so. Like unbelievable. Like I'm blown away by their athleticism. Just like watching like gymnasts at the Olympics and stuff. Like it's amazing. However, there was a couple times I took a little snooze. I took a little snooze. Don't tell anybody. But Avery did too. Our daughter, she fell asleep as well. So I didn't feel that bad. I was like, we were napping together. But
No, I love all that stuff. Like I'd like to go to the theater or something, but I don't want to see like 4-year-olds do it. Like if it's going to be done, I want to see it done well. So yes,
Right.
but
Yeah,
that's
they
not
had,
to
like,
pick
a
on the
professional
creative
on
arts
that.
people. Sorry, my wife was in theater. Love you guys. You're very skilled and talented in ways I'm not. But I had to pick on something, right?
That's great. But I do like what you're saying, again, about finding what our kids are good at, passionate at, and love, and helping encourage that. And it may be different than us. So, again, we got to take one for the team in this scenario. I look at my daughter, Avery, and she's 17, about to graduate high school, and she is really passionate about music and about writing songs and playing guitar and learning guitar, learning other things. She's trying to teach herself how to play piano, and I love that. Like I love music. Like I'm all about her doing that. I grew up just playing sports. It's just kind of all that I did, right? So early in her life, that's what we did. She played soccer, she played basketball. We were out in the yard throwing the football and all these things, and then we get up into high school, almost high school. She's in 8th grade, and they pulled her up one Christmas tournament to be the point guard for the varsity basketball team. And I'm like, oh wow, let's see what this. And after that, she just honestly, she just was like, yeah, I don't really love basketball. She does it because she enjoys being around her friends, and she likes being active and taking care of herself and that kind of thing, which is super cool. But I was seeing that, oh man, she's got some talent, some skill, and some ability. She's got a much better jump shot than me. She sees the game better than I do, and she can see hey, when she's playing, a player should go here and they should do this. And sometimes she would even make a pass that she was supposed to make because the player should have cut there, but the player didn't know they were supposed to cut there. This kind of thing. And so I'm seeing all that, thinking, oh man, she's gonna be the next, Caitlin Clark, kind of thing. And then she just does it. She's not as passionate about it, as I was. And I had to get to a point where I was like, okay, she can play the sport just for exercise and to be social, and it doesn't have to be her thing. Her thing is music and video production and audio production, right? And so now I'm like seeing that, and it's like, okay, how can I support her in that? Because, you know, that's her passion. That's really extreme giftedness, you know, for her. And so that's just a practical example of how sometimes we have to pivot and be ready. If we see something that our kids are good at, but they're not loving it and they're not going to want to pour their lives into it, then we have to figure out, well, what are they good at and they love, right? So that way we can help push that, just like you're going to be in ballet for the next 15 years. So.
You're going to devote some prayer to that every night and hour, yeah?
Yeah. All right. Anything else on this topic, man?
No, I think we're good. We can keep giving examples, but I think the point stands, you know, like keep those two guardrails in mind. Like you don't want to be the disinterested parent, and you don't want to be the parent that lets your kids go pretend to be cats when they're 23 years old and all that fun stuff. So,
that's right, man.
Just keep it within the guardrails, keep it in the lanes, and you know, help your kids grow to be who the Lord created them to be.
I love it, man. So thank y'all for joining us here today in the jungle. If you've been hearing all the birds that want to join our podcast today, we like to do our show outside sometimes, which in our neck of the woods means we're going to be fighting some birds for some microphone time. But yeah, thanks for joining us today. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Please, again, check out my books, Every Little Thing, 6 Small Steps to Perfect Peace, or Thy Will Be Done. You can find those where books are sold. Let's not be lost. Let's be found in Him.